there. Thanks for joining me today on this talk for working with business partners. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, especially given the current circumstances. It's hard to sometimes get together in person, obviously, so it's nice to have this virtual venue to explore some new ideas and become better engineering leaders. My name is Tim Bornholdt. I am a partner with the Jed Mahonis Group and a co-founder. We started this company about 8 years ago, back in 2012. I've been developing websites since I was in first grade, so I have a long history of building web apps, and through our company, we've worked with a lot of different kinds of business owners. We've worked with C-level executives at Fortune 500 companies. We've worked with entrepreneurs that just have what they say 10K in a dream, and we've worked kind of with everyone in between. So we've delivered over 100 apps to the App Store and the Play Store, so we have a lot of experience, and I've got a lot of experience with working with different kinds of business partners. And today's talk, I want to focus around some tactics that you can use to kind of put yourself in the right mindset and make a project go off successfully, especially when you have to work with others across different departments. First of all, I want to kick off this presentation by talking about perhaps the most ambitious project of all time. So this project cost $15.6 septillion. You can see that number on the screen there. It is a very large number. It also took 20 years to build, and there were millions of sentient laborers and droid and mechanical laborers that also helped to create this product. And if droid didn't give it away, what I am obviously talking about is the Death Star. And the reason I'm talking about the Death Star is I want to talk about the Death Star's product owner, which, of course, is this guy. So Darth Vader, by all accounts, he's one of the most notorious villains of all time. If you look at movie lists, he's always up there as one of the most significant villains ever made in literature. And it goes without saying, right? He was a pretty bad dude. He was very ruthless. He would literally choke people out if they weren't agreeing with what he had to say. He even resorted to destroying an entire planet, right? But I think that one thing that goes understated with Darth Vader is he actually was a pretty good project leader. I would say he was probably one of the most successful of all time. He he delivered results, right? You have a budget that large. How many of you have managed, even 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 figure budgets, and successfully delivered them? Not a lot of people get that opportunity, and this dude had like a 100-figure budget. And throughout all the different chaos that happened during the construction of the Death Star, Darth Vader held the team together despite having lots of contrarian viewpoints, and he was also laser focused in how he worked. So the reason that I bring up Darth Vader is that when you're working with other people, how you frame the situation really makes a big difference in whether or not you're going to work together successfully, which leads me to perhaps one of my favorite quotes that I've ever come across. It's by John Barth, and he says, "Everyone is necessarily the hero of his own life story." So what that means to me is when you're working with other people and you're going through a project, you obviously have goals and you have things that you want to get done and accomplish. But with any project, I think it's pretty obvious that everyone has goals, right? And everyone wants to succeed with not only how this project fits into the context of the chapter of their life, but in terms of their entire life story. And I think it's very important that when you're working on projects and you're working with other people, every project at the end of the day has 2 goals in mind. There's 2 goals that I think are important with every project, and that's complete the project successfully. Obviously, the project's got to get done and done well. But also, I think everyone needs to be made the hero of their own story. And if there's one thing that you can take away from this talk already, it's going to be that the most successful people that work, that have the best successful relationships with business partners is that you take the time to figure out how to make the other person the hero of their own story, which in turn, they help you to be the hero of your story. So how do you work with business partners? I really briefly want to define the term business partner because it was confusing to me when I was coming up with this talk. I first thought that business partner meant the guy that I own my business with, and I have stake in a few different businesses, and I was thinking, okay, I could talk about working with other entrepreneurs and business partners, but really, I think for the purposes of this talk, a business partner is somebody that has a vested interest in your project, but isn't under you in the org chart. So, obviously you've got like your C-level executives, product owners, stakeholders, so on and so forth. But the other thing to keep in mind is oftentimes it's not just people that are your subordinates, but it's people that are on the same level as you in that org chart. So I'm talking, if you're a designer, then maybe the developers, or if you're a developer, maybe the QA people. And I think that the key to working with anybody and the key to success of successfully working with people is empathy. And I think that you can use empathy to create ways that you can both advance your agenda and help someone else advance theirs. So empathy is like a concept that is very commonly thrown around during these kinds of talks, right? So how do you actually achieve empathy? How can you, what are some tools that you can use to begin working on empathy? One tool that I find is the most important tool in establishing empathy are what people refer to as mental models. So let's talk about mental models. A mental model, if you, again, we used to say Merriam-Webster's dictionary, but Wikipedia defines a mental model as a representation of the surrounding world, the relationships between its various parts, and a person's intuitive perception about his or her own acts and their consequences. So that's a mouthful, right? Basically, a mental model is a way that helps you determine how the world works. So in order to illustrate this, I want us to all picture a farmland, just an idyllic scene of a few dozen acres of farmland out in the middle of rural USA. Let's imagine there's 4 different people that are looking at this land. So first of all, we've got a botanist. And maybe the botanist sees that farmland and looks at the plants that are growing on that farmland and tries to figure out how they're thriving. How are they working with each other? How are these different pesticides interacting with the land and making sure that we're ridding the things we want to get rid of and keeping the things that we want to keep? A business person, I love that stock graphic. It really drives home the fact that this is a business person. A business person might look at the land and try to figure out what is going to provide the most value for that land. Maybe it's growing wheat. Maybe it's growing corn. Maybe it's cattle. Maybe it's sod. Or maybe it's selling the land to a developer. That's the framework by which this business person might look at the land. A city planner might look at the land and try to figure out how this small parcel fits into the bigger picture of where the city wants to strategically drive its vision for different zoning ordinances. So, for example, if maybe the north side of the land is butting up against like a strip mall and the south side of the land is butting up against some residential area, how do we parcel out that land so that we're making sure that there's some seamlessness between all of the different things that are going on in the community? And finally, maybe there's a bored child and they're driving to rural Iowa to visit their grandparents and they see nothing but acres and acres and miles of corn and farmland, and they just don't really think anything of it. They just do not care at all. So those are 4 different ways to look at the same thing, right? And none of them are wrong. They're all perfectly valid ways. I mean, the last one's a little close to home. My dad's from rural Iowa, so I have a little bit of a memory of that. But really, none of those ways of viewing the problem are wrong. So let me take a different example here. So let's say that we work for a software company, and we're working on adding a new form of payment into our app. Now, a product owner, they're probably going to worry about where that problem ranks in terms of importance against other problems that are in the product. And maybe they're trying to figure out if now is the right time to add in this new form of payment, or if there's other pressing situations that need to be taken care of first. A designer is going to look at this new feature and try to figure out a way to seamlessly introduce that feature within existing payment methods. An engineer might look at this problem and see the complexity with things like rejected payments and handling past due invoices and making sure that we're following PCI and being compliant with handling the user's sensitive information. And finally, the CFO, maybe they're worried about tax implications of what happens if this new form of payment requires us to file things in a certain different way, or how do we deal with the revenue that's going to be coming as a result of adding in this new feature. So again, 4 very different ways of looking at the very same problem, and none of them are wrong. And in fact, they're all very important to succeeding with getting the project done correctly. And I think the important thing to remember when you're working with business partners is all of these people have a different mental model of what they're coming into with this situation. And it's your job as a partner to understand where they're coming from so that you can work together to solve the problem. So a pretty simple equation. The more mental models you have in your head and the bigger your worldview of the problem, the easier it is to empathize with your partners, which means you will have a successful partnership. So I think that one thing that I wanted to throw out there again with mental models really quick, this blog, Farnham Street, is where I first really became aware of mental models. And if you go to that site, that's on that page, they have like 110 different ways of different models of viewing the world. It's really, really cool. And I highly recommend that you take a shot at looking at it, maybe in 40 minutes after this talk is over. So now that we've talked about some different ideas like mental models and empathy, how do you actually set the stage for a successful partnership? Well, like any project, I think the most important thing to do is to have a project kickoff, but not necessarily the way that most people do it. Typically, on most of the projects I've been a part of, what happens is one person, maybe 2, get a chance to stand up in front of the entire team and lay out the groundwork for here's the problem and here's the solution. And it's basically kind of one person getting to talk about what they see as concerns, and everyone else kind of nods their heads, and then everybody's on the same page with that person. But the problem is that everyone around the table, just like we had talked about with the designer, the CFO, the engineer, all of them have different concerns that they are all isolated from each other on. The project kickoff is the perfect opportunity to let everyone have a chance to voice their concerns and make sure everybody's on the same page with what other people are worried about. So the key here is you need to do more listening than actually trying to solve problems. Now, I know that when somebody comes to me with a problem, my first instinct is always to just sit and try to solve it right then and there. I want the problem to be gone. And as my wife will attest, sometimes people don't necessarily want the problem solved. They just want to be heard. And that's a key part of working with other people, is making sure you're listening to their problems. And that's what's going to make you a valuable partner, is if you're able to understand where they're coming from, you can take some time to sit back and think about what they had said and try to come up with a solution and come back to them later, maybe hash it out or figure out how you can actually solve it. But that's what kind of works out really nicely with these project kickoffs, is it's an opportunity for you to pair your strengths with someone else's weaknesses, and the others on the team, while you're sharing your concerns, they might be able to step up and help you out with whatever problems you have. It's all about finding that right balance of complementing each other with strengths and weaknesses. Now, often when you're kicking off a project, there's several concerns. And the 3 most common concerns revolve around deadlines, costs, and contracts. So I just wanted to focus on those for a couple of minutes so that we can just get some of those ideas out of the way. I think that with deadlines, specifically when it comes to engineering projects, it's often very hard to come up with timelines on things. And often when you're talking up to an engineer and asking them to estimate out how long it's going to take something, the kind of rule of thumb is to take what they say, double it, and then add 50% on top of that. It's people are really bad at estimating time. So when it comes to deadlines, I think what's important is that you're realistic about deadlines and that you're able to work together to, again, figure out where people are coming from. Usually deadlines are dictated by people that are much higher than you on the org chart, and they kind of trickle down, and there needs to be some understanding of, because the person up here can see the whole world where you might be down a little bit further in the stack and only see what you've got going on. So it works to be able to have, express your concerns about how long something is going to take and work together to figure out how to get it accomplished in a timely manner. Next is cost. So just like with deadlines, right? Engineers are notoriously bad at estimating how much things are going to cost. It's a lot easier to finish a project and estimate out a project, both in terms of time and cost, when you break it down into smaller chunks. And that's really why things like Agile have become so popular. And if you can actually get buy-in to move that way, things work a lot more smoothly. But if you're in an organization where that's not quite possible, just find ways to break your project down into smaller sizes that you can then portion out, because with any project, as you get going down the path, you're going to veer and take some turns. So the bigger your project is, the more it's likely going to change by the time you get to the end of it. So just make sure that you have ways that you can break it down into smaller chunks, and then discuss a strategy at the outset with your whole team of what you're going to do to address those overages. I think spelling all of that out in the outset is something that's really helpful to keep everybody on the same page. Finally, we've got contracts. So contracts, I heard the guy who started Keller Williams, I think his name's Gary Keller, he calls contracts disagreements instead of agreements. And it's because typically you only pull out a contract when something is going very, very, very wrong. And some of you, this might not apply. If you're in like a large organization, you might be sheltered from the wonderful world of contracts, but being an entrepreneur and running an agency, we deal in contracts all day. So just one thing that I'll say about contracts is it's better to take time up front and go through the contract in detail so that you're very clear on what happens when a project goes wrong. Because any project of any kind of significance there's bound to be some issues, right? So work together at the beginning of the project to figure out what those circumstances are going to be, and you're going to be a lot happier on the outset of it. The other thing that is super important to do when you start a project is to set appropriate boundaries for communication. So early on in our company's history, we had clients that would call us all hours of the day, literally phone calls at like 7 o'clock on a Saturday night, to ask us the most mundane questions. It was so stressful that it got to the point where when my ringtone would go off, I'd start getting anxiety attacks because it was just so ridiculous how often people were communicating with us. And it's one of those things that if you don't expressly say what you want to do, your actions will kind of set a tone regardless. So if somebody shoots you an email and you respond to it at 6 a.m. on a Sunday, people will just expect that you're on all the time, and they're going to bother you all the time. Most projects that are worth doing require you to have some type of deep focused work where you can just focus and get your part of the project done and make some significant progress. Especially us in the knowledge working area, we need time away from people with our headphones in, just us doing our own thing. So it's really important early on to establish this is the medium by which you can contact me. I take phone calls during business hours. Don't text me. And Slack is appropriate for communication, and I don't have to respond to it the second that you message me. Just getting those boundaries out there and in front of everybody so we're all on the same page, that's going to really lead to a healthy, happy, positive business relationship environment. So now that we've set the stage for a successful project, what are some tips that you can use to work well with business partners during a project? Well, first of all, when you are in charge of giving feedback to somebody else, make sure that your feedback is clear and constructive. When you see a problem with a project, it's not enough to just say what the problem is. Sometimes you need to explain why it's a problem. Case in point, let's say you're a designer and you are constantly having to tell your developer, hey, you're using the wrong font here. Hey, you're using the wrong color here. Sometimes developers tend to have a mindset of if it works, then who cares what it looks like? But from your mindset as a designer, functionality is an important part of the user experience and how the app gets used. A good design is really important for actually delivering a successful product. So sometimes it helps to explain to the developer, hey, this is why we have to use these colors. It's part of the brand guidelines. It helps establish our identity, so on and so forth, whatever you have to say. But just taking the extra time to help explain your mental model of how the project needs to work to somebody else who doesn't quite understand it, that might be more useful than just the feedback itself that you need to keep changing it. Next, receive feedback with grace. Receiving feedback is never fun. Especially, everyone's their own worst critic. So when someone points out something that's wrong, it's very easy to get defensive. So when you're receiving feedback from a business partner, don't be very defensive and suspend your judgment. I would say that what's most important with this one is to make sure you're asking lots of questions. So if somebody comes to you and tells you that there's a problem and they see that you're doing something wrong, keep asking questions and dig deeper to understand what the root of the problem is. Because oftentimes, especially here in the Midwest, people like to have one problem that's up here and they're really mad about a problem that's down here, and you have to kind of drill down to get to it. So I'd say when people tell you something's wrong, keep digging until you actually figure out what's wrong. That's going to really help make sure that you're both on the same page with solving the problem. Get in a solid routine. I think that whether you are meeting weekly, daily, bi-weekly, however you choose to meet, make sure you have a schedule set and make sure that you're constantly staying with it. The more that you communicate and the more that you keep talking, that's going to push the project forward and make sure that you guys are constantly communicating about the same stuff. My business partner and I, for example, we actually talk every single day. We have about a 45-minute phone call every day where we recap what's going on in our business. We talk about personal stuff. There's no real agenda, but we just kind of cover what we've been working on and what's on our minds at the time. And I think the more you can get into a rhythm with in a routine of how often you communicate with your business partners, that's going to, again, make sure that you're always on the same page with whatever is going on in the project at the time. And finally, the last tip, be flexible and be adaptable. So when someone comes to you with a problem, be understanding, be flexible. Things change, projects change. The important thing is to preserve the relationship, right? That's what business is all about. And that's what being a good business partner is making sure you're both working together. Again, remember the true goals of the project that we discussed at the beginning. You want to finish the project successfully, and you want to make everyone the hero of their own story. If someone comes to you because some timeline changed, they came across an unforeseen problem, whatever the issue is, work with them and try to work together to come up with the solution. That's really the key of any relationship, right? Is being flexible and working together to make sure that you satisfy the goals of the project and that you both are ultimately successful at the end of the day. So project's over, right? We're all done with being partners. We don't have to talk to them ever again. No, once you finish a project, that's rarely ever it. That's rarely the end of the conversation. So once a project is over, here's a few tips that you can take away to make sure that you continue to have a successful business relationship going forward. Give credit where credit is due. It's another solid stock photo. Again, be the hero be everyone being the hero of their own story. That's very important, right? Everyone wants to be recognized, and oftentimes people don't get recognized, especially partners. When we're talking about, remember we said the horizontal level, where it's somebody that you don't necessarily have they're not your subordinate. It's kind of sometimes awkward to give credit where credit is due, but make sure whenever somebody has done something to help you out with what you're doing, give them the credit. Deflect it back to them. If you're in a meeting and the executive compliments you on your team for delivering something, but you really couldn't have done it without marketing or whoever, call them out right then and there. Give everyone their credit, because that's really going to help going forward establish a solid business relationship with your business partners. Next, take ownership of your mistakes. Just like any story, right? Stories do not exist without conflict, and no one is going to make it through a project with zero conflict. Things always go wrong one way or the other. So make sure when it's your fault for screwing something up, own the mistake. Just own up to it. People are very forgiving, and often people forget individual things that might have gone wrong through a project, but they're never going to forget if you step up and take control and ownership of your mistakes and provide solutions. And if at the end of the project, when you go back and reflect on it with your business partners, you can talk about ways going forward that you can improve so that you are all on the same page and that you're not going to repeat the same mistakes again going forward. And finally, my last tip for working with business partners is be grateful. There are so many studies out there about gratitude and how just having a grateful mindset actually has tremendous physical and mental benefits. And one technique that I've learned and that I use a lot if I have trouble falling asleep at night is I will sit and with the alphabet start at the letter A and think of one thing that I'm grateful for that happened that day that started with the letter A and go on and down the line. And it has never failed me that I don't think I've ever made it consciously past like F, because you start to think through all the positive things that happened in your day and something just happens to your body, you just relax. That carries over to working with other people. If you're constantly grateful and you're constantly heaping accolades and thanking people for their hard work and their contributions to the project, that's going to make people want to work with you again in the future. More often than not, when you watch talks like these about working with other people, the emphasis is on other people. But often it needs to be more of an introspective look. There's nothing you can really do if you have a jerk boss or if you have some person you have to work with that you don't get along with. There's not much you can do as an individual other than leave. But you can't do anything directly to change that. What you can do, though, is to start being appreciative. People notice that. And I think it's really important if you want to be successful with negotiating business partnerships, you need to be grateful and appreciative. And I think that if you take time to just appreciate things people do during the project, again, like we talked about with previous slides, that's super helpful and it's going to help you out in the long run. I want to end this presentation with a quote that, just like the everyone's a hero of their own story, I think about this quote a lot too. It's from Maya Angelou. It says, "At the end of the day, people won't remember what you said or did. They will remember how you made them feel." I think empathy and using mental models to achieve empathy is the only thing that really matters when it comes to working with business partners. Everyone's going to have their own agenda. People aren't going to always get along. You're going to have times when you clash. But at the end of the day, with those last few tips that I gave of showing gratitude and owning your mistakes and helping people, giving them credit where credit is due, that's the kind of stuff that people are going to remember about working with you. There's not much you can do to change other people, but you can impact how you react to a situation and how you react to your business partners. So I think what it all comes down to at the end of the day, working with other people means taking time to understand where they're coming from, finding a way to get into their mindset, and finding a way to work within their mindset to solve a problem. So that is my talk. I really appreciate you taking the time to watch this. I'm going to be on the Zoom or the Hangout, whatever we're doing here, to answer questions. And if you have questions you want to talk to me offline, or if you are wanting to talk about anything, mobile apps or software or anything, I love chatting with people. So find me on LinkedIn. I'm at Tim Bornholdt on Twitter and all the social medias. And you can also email me, tim@jedmahonisgroup.com, and I'm happy to take any emails there. So thanks again for watching, and I hope you guys all have a great day.